Hello friends. So today we will see uh, what do you mean by transaction processing and concepts related to transaction processing. So in this chapter we will see what exactly is transaction processing and what are the how the transaction takes place and what are the desirable properties of the transactions. So we'll see a few examples of transaction also, and there are some problems when transaction is taking place. So we will see all these things with examples. So already we have seen there are many systems. So single user system, so that is at least only one user is required to operate at a single instance of time. So only one user can use this system. Then multi-user systems. So many users can access the system concurrently at the same time. So single user system is nothing but what we are using presently. That is a single user is being operating single system. So where only he is the person who is authorized to use that system. Then multi-user system. So multi-user system, many users. So for example, suppose there is a reservation system. It could be anything like bus reservation system or aeroplane reservation system or maybe railway reservation system. So these systems are multi-user system where in a single time, at a single instance of time, many users can log in and the system is handling these many users at the same time. So to manage this multi-user system, we need to manage two important things, that is interleaved processing and parallel processing. Since the work going here is parallel, so there are many processes that are required which used to work concurrently with multiple CPUs, that is processors. And how these processes work? So these processes should work with interleaved processing. So that is, a process is interleaved in a single CPU, that is concurrent execution should be interleaved to each other. So transaction, the definition goes like this: that's logical unit of the database processing that includes one or more access operations. Now access operations here define read, that is reading from the hard disk or reading a data, reading from the database, that generally we call it as retrieval from the database. And the second one is called write, that is when we insert some data to the database or we update an existing value or we delete some values from the database. So that's what we call it as transaction, but it should happen in real time with the real data. Then this transaction, it consists of set of operations. So it may be standalone specified with a SQL, so where SQL can be interactive or may be embedded within a program. So that is like a PLSQL. Now this transaction, it starts and ends, so there are boundaries with the transactions. So when you are doing a transaction, that's the generally it's a kind of function, so which will start and which will end. So to do this transaction, we require an application program. So when you see probably you have worked on or you have used that Android application for a railway reservation app, for example IRCTC. So when you open, it begins with user registration or maybe entering the user details. Then it processes with how many seats you require, the day and the date of the reservation, which train. So all these details will come, and then it will ask you for the fund transfer. Then you do the fund transfer. Then once the fund is transferred, that it will show the ticket is booked. So then it shows it is successful. Then this is what, from beginning to the end, whatever the transaction happens, so this is what is called as a transaction process. Then what are the To do this transaction processing, we require the database, as already we know. And then we have, for the database is nothing but it's a granularity of the data. That is, a field is there, a record is there, or maybe a disk log. So where the database is stored, we can consider this database as part of the disk. So on the disk, the data is stored. And what are the basic operations that we need to perform on this database? So that is, in this there's functions. So probably you have seen this one in the operating system also, something called as read and write logs. So probably I have seen a cache during the operating system. So cache is nothing but a temporary memory. So where you are going to, when you are accessing the items in the cache, the data goes and it sits there. And cache is a temporary memory where you are reading the data. So only one time the data will be read from the hard disk to avoid multiple readings from directly from the hard disk. So what it will do, so when you read the data, only for the first time it comes and sits into the cache, and next step, whatever you are reading, until the data is updated, the same value is being read from the cache. So generally we have two functions or two operations when we are doing it on the accessing the data. So that what we call it as read data. So the read data, it reads the database. The definition goes like this: it's a read. It reads a database item named x. X is a value or maybe a memory. So into a program variable. So we have a program like x equal to 10. The 10 goes into x, and then write item x. So when you're going to change that value, suppose 10 changes to 30, 50 or anything, when you update that value and you want to write it back, you want to store it back, then we call it as a write item. So whatever there in the value x contains, that value will be rewritten back into the hard disk, that is the disk block. So we will see this read and write operations in the next session.